It was the second day of the new millennium, January 2nd, 2000, a Sunday evening in Asheville, North Carolina. The kind of night where the air hangs thick with winter's bite, and the stillness feels deeper than usual. For many, the Y2K fears had faded into punchlines. Computers hadn't shut down, cities hadn't gone dark, and the world hadn't ended. But for one young man, 18-year-old Zebb Quinn, this night would mark the beginning of a mystery that has haunted western North Carolina for decades, a mystery with no answers, no closure, and a silence that screams louder with every passing year. Zebb was not the kind of kid you'd expect to vanish, not the reckless type, not the runaway kind. He was a dedicated employee at a local Walmart, quiet, hardworking, a little shy. He lived with his mother and sister, close-knit and content with the simple rhythms of life. At just 18, he was preparing for his future, saving money, planning ahead, and thinking about college. But beneath his reserved exterior, those who knew him said he was kind, loyal, and trustworthy, the kind of friend who would never leave someone stranded. The kind of son who called home. The kind of brother who showed up. That Sunday night, Zebb clocked out of his shift at the Hendersonville Road Walmart around 9 p.m. His co-worker, Jason Owens, 22 years old, was waiting outside. The two had made plans to drive and look at a car Zebb was interested in buying. Owens claimed he knew the seller. It should have been a quick trip. Check the car out, talk numbers, head back home. But Zebb would never return. The last confirmed sighting of him was when he and Owens were seen on a surveillance camera at a nearby convenience store around 9:15 p.m. Zebb appeared calm. He bought a soda, and I walked back to his car. Owens followed in his own vehicle. From there, the trail grows cold. Owens would later tell police that as they drove toward the car seller's location, Zebb received a page on his beeper. Moments later, Zebb pulled his car to the side of the road, jumped out, and used a payphone nearby to call someone. Owens said that after the call, Zebb seemed shaken, panicked even, and told Owens he had to leave immediately. He sped off in his car, and that, Owens claimed, was the last he saw of Zebb Quinn. But that story didn't sit right. Zebb's family reported him missing the next day. He hadn't come home, hadn't called, hadn't shown up for work. His disappearance set off alarm bells instantly. This wasn't just out of character, it was unthinkable. His mother, Denise Vlahakis, went straight to the police, and while authorities launched an investigation, the early days were slow. There was no crime scene, no evidence of foul play, no witnesses. Just one person who claimed to be the last to see him. Jason Owens. And then things got stranger. On January 4th, 2 days after Zebb vanished, someone called in sick to Walmart, pretending to be him. The voice didn't sound like Zebb's. Co-workers immediately suspected something was wrong. Zebb never missed work, let alone without calling himself. Police traced the call and discovered it came from a phone at a Volvo plant where Owens worked. When questioned, Owens admitted to making the call, claiming Zebb had asked him to a favor, he said, just in case he needed time to clear his head. It wasn't just a red flag, it was a siren. Investigators leaned in. Why would a missing teenager ask someone to pretend to be him? Why would someone comply unless they had something to hide? But when pressed, Owens stuck to his story. He said he didn't know where Zebb went and hadn't seen him since the moment Zebb peeled off into the night. And yet just hours after that supposed last sighting, Owens checked himself into a hospital with head injuries and broken ribs. He claimed he'd been in a car accident, but no police report existed. No crash scene was found. No other cars were involved. The story didn't add up. Then on January 16th, nearly 2 weeks after Zebb's disappearance, his 1990 Mazda Protégé was found. It had been parked in a random lot outside a Little Pig's barbecue restaurant on McDowell Street, in an area Zebb had no known connection to. The car was locked, the windows fogged. Inside, investigators found some of the most disturbing clues of the entire case. There was a live puppy left alone and malnourished in the back seat. There were lip prints in lipstick on the rear windshield, smudged and unsettling. There were a hotel keycard, a bottle, and a jacket that didn't belong to Zebb. And the driver's seat? It had been pushed far back, much farther than Zebb would have needed to drive comfortably. Nothing made sense. Why would someone park the car there? Why leave a puppy? What did the lipstick mean? And why the fake phone call? Each clue raised new questions, none with answers. Investigators considered everything: a prank gone wrong, a love triangle, a kidnapping, a mental health crisis. But every theory fell apart when faced with the evidence. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle from a different box. Then came whispers, rumors that Zebb had recently started seeing a girl, and that this relationship may have stirred jealousy in someone else. A co-worker, a rival, a secret. Zebb had mentioned a girl named Misty Taylor who was reportedly involved in a volatile relationship with another man, possibly even being stalked. Misty and Zebb had spent time together, talked often, and it was clear he cared about her. But police couldn't prove any connection between her and the night he disappeared. Misty denied knowing where Zebb had gone, and her boyfriend was never charged. Still, those who knew the details couldn't shake the sense that Zebb had been lured into something. A setup, a trap. And Robert Jason Owens? He faded from the spotlight, quietly disappearing from the narrative, until years later when darkness circled back around. In 2015, 15 years after Zebb Quinn vanished, Robert Jason Owens was arrested for the brutal murders of Christy Schoen and her husband, Joseph Codd, along with their unborn child. He confessed to killing them and attempting to dispose of their bodies by dismembering and burning them in a wood stove. The news rocked the community. Owens, the last man to see Zebb Quinn alive, had become a convicted killer. The coincidence was too chilling to ignore. Suddenly, Zebb's case roared back to life. Investigators returned to Owens' property with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. They searched his backyard. They dug up concrete. They combed the woods. But no trace of Zebb was ever found. Only silence. Only questions. Only that eternal pause after a frightened young man whispered, "I have to go," and vanished into the cold night. No. And to this day, the lips on the rear windshield, the key card, the mysterious injuries, and the phone call from inside a Volvo factory, they remain as haunting as the still air over Asheville on that January night. Zebb Wayne Quinn was never found. Not his body, not his voice, not his shadow. Only the mystery remains. And for his family, the ache continues year after year, waiting not just for justice, but for truth. As days turned to weeks, then to months, the Quinn family sank into a relentless cycle of grief, confusion, and hollow hope. Every time the phone rang, Denise Flahakis paused, bracing herself. Was this the call, a lead, a breakthrough, or just another ghost in the line? The investigation into Zebb Quinn's disappearance had grown cold fast. There were no ransom notes, no confirmed sightings, and no suspects charged. The strange, surreal clues left behind in his Mazda weren't so much a trail as they were a wall, each item hinting at meaning but never connecting. Forensic analysis yielded little. The car was clean, too clean. No fingerprints, no blood. The puppy, alive but malnourished, was treated by animal control, but it had no tags, no chip, and no way to tie it back to anyone involved. It was like someone had planted chaos inside the car just to confuse the narrative. Police focused in on the only person they had, Robert Jason Owens. Owens, with his head injuries, his lies, and his sudden disappearance from public view, became the dark cloud hanging over every theory. He claimed Zebb had panicked and driven off after receiving a mysterious page, but phone records showed no incoming messages to Zebb's beeper at the time Owens said it happened. The phone call Zebb allegedly made, there was no trace of it. Payphones didn't log much back then, but the story felt rehearsed, like something Owens had repeated to himself enough times to believe. Then came the injuries. Owens showed up at a local hospital in the early hours of January 3rd with broken ribs, a head wound, and a concussion. He said he'd been in a car accident, yet there was no police report, no call to emergency services, and no damage reported to his truck. Investigators believed the injuries were intentional, possibly from a struggle or an attempt to cover something up, maybe even a failed suicide attempt. And then, the fake sick call. When Owens admitted to impersonating Zebb to call in sick at Walmart, claiming it was Zebb's idea, investigators were stunned. It was brazen and unnecessary, unless Zebb had already vanished, and Owens wanted to buy time. Denise Quinn knew her son. He would never ask someone to lie for him, and he sure as hell wouldn't abandon his job, his car, his family, or his life. But without a body, there was no murder. Without witnesses, there was no crime. Only Owens, the man who seemed to be orbiting the disappearance like a silent moon. Investigators began digging deeper into Owens' past. They found a pattern, nothing overtly criminal, but enough strange behavior to raise eyebrows. Former coworkers described him as off, withdrawn, and sometimes volatile. He was the kind of guy who kept to himself, didn't make friends easily, and didn't talk much about his life. But he always seemed to know too much about other people's business. Despite this, the case remained stalled. Owens stopped cooperating. He moved, got a job, kept a low profile. As time dragged on, public interest faded. The media shifted their attention, and the Quinn family was left to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. But in the quiet shadows of Asheville, rumors kept swirling. Some said Zebb had been involved with the wrong people, that he owed money or had uncovered something he wasn't supposed to know. Others whispered about Misty Taylor, the girl Zebb was reportedly interested in, and her boyfriend, a man with a violent streak and a possessive reputation. There were suggestions of jealousy, of control, of threats made behind closed doors. But Misty denied any wrongdoing, and her boyfriend was never officially named as a suspect. Then came an anonymous letter. In 2002, 2 years after Zebb's disappearance, a letter arrived at the Asheville Police Department. It claimed to know what happened to Zebb and who was responsible. The handwriting was shaky, the grammar erratic. It read like the confessions of someone on the edge or the bait of a cruel hoax. The letter accused a group of local men of abducting and killing Zebb, saying his body had been buried on Owens' property under a concrete slab. Police rushed to follow up. Cadaver dogs were brought in. A search warrant was executed. Ground was broken, but nothing was found. No bones, no blood, no trace of Zebb. Another dead end. For Denise, the pain became part of daily life. Every birthday passed like a countdown. Every holiday, a cruel reminder. She clung to the hope that someday someone would talk, that guilt would outweigh fear, that a conscience somewhere would crack. But as the years marched on, even hope began to feel like betrayal. And then, nearly 15 years after Zebb Quinn vanished, the past exploded into the present. In March 2015, Robert Jason Owens was arrested in connection with the disappearance of Christy Schoen Codd, and her husband, Joseph J.T. Codd, and their unborn child. Christy was a professional chef who had appeared on the Food Network. She and J.T. were newlyweds, expecting their first baby, when they went missing from their home in Leicester, North Carolina. When investigators searched Owens' property, they made a horrifying discovery. Inside a wood stove, they found bone fragments, teeth, and remnants of human remains. Owens eventually confessed. He had killed them, dismembered them, and tried to destroy the evidence by burning their bodies. It was a level of violence that sent shockwaves through the community. And suddenly, the whispers surrounding Zebb Quinn's disappearance weren't just speculative. They were now plausible. If Owens could do this to an entire family, what had he done to Zebb? Authorities returned to Owens' property with fresh eyes. Ground-penetrating radar was used again. New cadaver dogs were deployed. But the trail had grown too cold. Owens had moved houses multiple times over the years. He had poured concrete, burned garbage, buried ashes. If Zebb had once been there, he wasn't anymore. In the wake of the murders, Owens struck a plea deal. He avoided the death penalty by confessing to killing the Codds. He was sentenced to serve 59.5 to 74.5 years in prison without parole. But even behind bars, he refused to talk about Zebb. Authorities tried. They offered deals. They hinted at leniency. But Owens stayed silent. He never confessed. He never denied. He just closed his mouth and let the clock tick. Zebb's family was left to watch from the sidelines as the man they believed was responsible for the son's disappearance slipped through the cracks of justice once again. The ache was unbearable. There was no closure, no body, no confession, just the unrelenting reality that their son had vanished without a trace, and the only person who might know the truth had already taken 3 other lives. To this day, Owens has never been charged in Zebb's case. Some say it's a matter of time, that he's waiting for a bigger deal, that he's holding the truth like bargaining chip. Others say he's just evil, that he enjoys the power of knowing, of dangling that final puzzle piece just out of reach. But there's one more twist. In 2017, a former acquaintance of Owens, whose identity has never been released, came forward with new information. According to this tipster, Owens had allegedly confessed to killing Zebb Quinn during a drug-fueled confrontation and had disposed of the body using hogs on a rural property. The details were horrifying, too specific to ignore. Police searched a rural site linked to Owens' extended family, digging and testing soil samples. But once again, nothing. Just shadows. Just stories. Just that gaping void where a son, a brother, and a friend should be. The Quinn family remains locked in limbo. For them, Zebb is not a cold case. He is not a mystery. He has a wound that never closes. His bedroom remains untouched. His belongings remain neatly folded. His memory, preserved in photographs and voice recordings, is the only thing left to cling to. And yet the questions never end. What happened in those final moments? Why did Zebb panic? Who lured him out there? Why was his car parked where it was? Who left the puppy? What did the lipstick mean? Why was the seat pushed back? Why hasn't Owens talked? And most of all, where is Zebb Quinn? In Asheville, time moves forward, but the ghost of Zebb lingers in the air like fog, heavy, quiet, unrelenting. For every case solved, his remains open. For every criminal caught, his killer walks free. He was just 18 years old, with a life ahead of him. And someone stole it all, silently, brutally, and got away with it. Years may pass, but certain tragedies refuse to fade. They linger not in headlines, but in the quiet corners of homes, in the dusty boxes of police evidence rooms, in the pauses between heartbeats of grieving families. The disappearance of Zebb Quinn isn't just an unsolved mystery. It's a wound stitched into the fabric of Asheville's quiet hills. It never healed. It never stopped bleeding. After Robert Jason Owens was sentenced for the brutal murders of Christie and J.T. Codd, the local community believed justice might finally reach backward into the cold grave of 2000 and shine a light on what happened to Zebb. But that light dimmed fast. Owens, perhaps for reasons only he understands, remained mute about Zebb. The man who had taken lives, dismembered bodies, and tried to incinerate the evidence had once been the last person to see an innocent 18-year-old alive. Yet even with pressure mounting, Owens said nothing. Not to the police, not to prosecutors, not to the family whose boy had vanished into the dark, with only one witness pointing toward the abyss. The investigators, many of whom had been involved in the case since the early days, weren't ready to let go. In 2017, new ground searches took place on properties once connected to Owens' relatives. A half-rural, half-industrial field just outside of Asheville was cordoned off. They brought out ground-penetrating radar, drones, cadaver dogs, and excavation crews. Soil samples were taken, old sheds dismantled, burn pits tested for bone matter, but nothing surfaced. No trace of Zebb, no hint of his clothing, no remnant of a body, a belt, a shoe, a phone, nothing. It was like he had been swallowed whole by the night. And then there was the lipstick. For years, the smudged lip print on the rear windshield of Zebb's car haunted everyone connected to the case. It wasn't just odd, it was unnatural, a strange, almost theatrical signature. Forensic testing couldn't confirm who it belonged to. DNA was too degraded. But the image stuck, a kiss, deliberately placed as if to say, "He's gone, and you'll never find him." Some investigators believed it was a red herring, planted to throw them off. Others were convinced it was symbolic, a personal taunt. Someone, perhaps female, had been involved, or someone wanted it to look that way. And then there were those who asked the darker question. Was Zebb's car staged as some kind of trophy? A last laugh or a warning? The hotel keycard found inside the vehicle led nowhere. No logins, no room assignments, no security footage. It had either never been used or had been scrubbed. The plastic bottle and jacket likewise provided no breakthroughs. The bottle was clean, no prints, no saliva. The jacket was too generic to trace, with no identifiers. Every clue inside that car teased investigators with the illusion of evidence. But each led only to dead ends. Privately, detectives theorized that Zebb may have been led to his death by someone he trusted. Someone who set up the car deal as a ruse, perhaps to lure him out, isolate him, and eliminate him. But why? He had no enemies, no debts, no double life. He was, by all accounts, a good kid from a good home. No drugs, no criminal record, no behavior suggesting self-destruction. But there was one angle that still drew quiet murmurs, his brief relationship with Misty Taylor. Misty was a co-worker of Zebb's. Their friendship had reportedly grown close in the weeks before he disappeared. But Misty had a boyfriend, Wesley Smith, who was known to be possessive, aggressive, and volatile. According to some accounts, Smith had discovered the growing closeness between Misty and Zebb and hadn't taken it well. Zebb had allegedly mentioned to friends that he felt like someone had been watching him recently, though he never elaborated. Some believe that Zebb was warned off either by Smith directly or through others. If a confrontation had been planned the night he disappeared, it may have escalated further than anyone expected. Yet Misty denied any connection to Zebb's disappearance. Smith was never arrested or formally named a suspect. Still, the possibility that the triangle had somehow set events in motion remains one of the most persistent, if unofficial, theories in the case. But if a confrontation had taken place, and where? Where had it ended? Where had Zebb's body been taken? The more people speculated, the stranger the narrative became. There were those who believed that Zebb had been killed elsewhere, perhaps on private property or in a remote area known only to Owens or someone else involved. The injuries Owens sustained, the broken ribs, the head trauma, could have come during a physical altercation, or more sinisterly, they may have been staged to throw off suspicion. A self-inflicted attempt to fabricate a crash that never happened. His story was always just detailed enough to seem plausible, but just vague enough to avoid scrutiny. Years later, when Owens killed the Codds, he didn't panic. He didn't call the police. He burned the bodies and went back to work. Cool, collected, mechanical. The signature of someone who had done this before, or at least thought about it, long enough to execute it flawlessly. It was that cold logic, that emptiness, that disturbed investigators the most. And yet, despite circumstantial mountains, no legal framework could support a murder charge in Zebb's case. No body, no confession, no eyewitness. Just Owens. And a silence louder than screams. The emotional toll on Zebb's mother was unrelenting. Denise Quinn became an unofficial investigator herself. She kept boxes of every document, newspaper clipping, report, and transcript she could find. Her house was part home, part archive. She corresponded with law enforcement regularly, even as the years passed and newer officers rotated through the case. She gave interviews, pleaded for information, and kept Zebb's face in the media whenever she could. On anniversaries, she would light a candle and speak directly to her son's photo, not out of madness, but out of hope, that somewhere, somehow, he might hear her, that someone who knew something might feel the weight of time and finally speak. But as the new millennium marched on, attention shifted to newer tragedies. New faces filled the missing posters, and Zebb's photo, once on every bulletin board in Buncombe County, became a relic, a fading symbol of a question no one could answer. Then came the tip-line tapes. In 2020, after a public records request by a local investigative journalist, a series of old hotline tips were released to the public. Among the dozens of calls were several disturbing voicemails, anonymous voices, sometimes slurred, sometimes shaken, claiming to know what happened to Zebb. One caller claimed that Owens didn't act alone. Another said that Zebb had been buried in a septic tank on property west of Asheville. A third claimed Zebb was beaten with a tire iron and burned. The tips were wild, unconfirmed, and many lacked any credibility. Yet they reignited something in the public. Forums buzzed. Reddit threads exploded. Cold case enthusiasts, criminologists, and local residents dug through satellite maps, property records, and old news reports. Everyone became an armchair detective, hoping to spot the overlooked detail that had evaded professionals for 20 years. But nothing solid came from the frenzy. And behind it all, Robert Jason Owens remained silent, serving time, waiting, or maybe laughing. His refusal to speak became its own form of psychological torture, a haunting echo for the Quinn family. Every time a deal was offered, every time a new interrogation happened, they waited, only to hear that he had once again said nothing. No denial, no admission, just silence. A man capable of extreme violence, sitting on a truth that might finally give a family peace. But he won't say a word. In some ways, Zebb's case became more than a mystery. It became a symbol of failure, of silence, of the blind corners in justice, where the truth hides in plain sight but can't be touched. For law enforcement, it was a lesson in limitation. How a case can be full of evidence but devoid of proof. For journalists, it became a cautionary tale about attention spans, about how even The most chilling disappearances can fade from public memory if they aren't packaged into compelling narratives. And for his family, it was a lifelong sentence. The Quinns still hold out hope that one day someone will break the silence, that Owens or someone connected to the case will finally talk. Whether it's on a deathbed, in a confession booth, or scribbled in a letter, they just want to know. Where is Zebb? What happened to their son? Why was he taken? And what became of his final moments? The questions, after all these years, are not just about justice anymore. They're about grief, about memory, about the unbearable cruelty of not knowing, about a boy who drove out one January night to look at a car and never came back, about a story that ends not with a scream but with a kiss smudged on glass. 24 years have passed since Zebb Quinn vanished. 2 decades of birthdays missed, holidays spent in mourning, empty chairs at every family gathering. In the halls of his childhood home, his room remains as he left it, quiet, untouched, frozen in time. His clothes still folded, his high school photos still framed, his favorite possessions sitting on the shelf collecting dust like relics of a life paused mid-sentence. For his mother, Denise Vlahakis, and his sister, the ache never dulled. It simply evolved. What began as raw panic transformed into a long, slow burn, a quiet form of suffering few can understand unless they've lived it. The grief of not knowing is a unique kind of torment. It doesn't end. It doesn't ease. It simply waits with you in every silence, in every shadow, whispering, "What if?" Over the years, Zebb's name became known to those who chronicle America's missing. He appears in forums, on podcasts, in true crime discussions, and YouTube documentaries, often among the ranks of Maura Murray, Brian Schaffer, and Asha Degree. Young people who seem to vanish into thin air, whose final moments remain unrecorded, and whose families were left clinging to theories instead of truths. In the annals of unsolved American mysteries, Zebb's case stands apart, not just because of the chilling strangeness, but because of the suffocating proximity to potential answers. This wasn't a disappearance without suspects. It wasn't a case with no clues. On the contrary, the story was crowded with possibilities, with circumstantial red flags, with one man at the center whose silence became a statement louder than any confession. Robert Jason Owens remains in prison today. Convicted murderer, dismemberer, burner of bodies. A man who displayed the capacity for evil and the cold calculation to cover his tracks. And yet, through years of questioning, plea offers, and direct confrontations, Owens has never said what happened to Zebb Quinn. He doesn't have to. Legally, there's no obligation for him to speak. No law that forces the truth out of a killer unless he chooses to give it. And so he sits in his cell, unapologetic, unspoken, and seemingly unbothered. To those who knew Zebb, that silence is unbearable. To Owens, it may be a final act of control, a last shred of power clutched in the dark. In 2021, renewed efforts were made behind the scenes. Technological advancements had changed how cold cases could be approached. DNA testing had evolved. Forensic genealogy was cracking cases once thought unsolvable. Across the country, long-lost remains were being identified. Serial killers from the 70s and 80s were finally being named, and families long dormant in their grief were being awakened by unexpected answers. The Quinn family wondered if Zebb might be among them. They submitted DNA samples. They followed leads. Every time remains were found in rural North Carolina, Denise braced herself. Every time the call came, and it wasn't Zebb, it was both a relief and a deeper kind of pain. He wasn't found. He was still out there. Somewhere. Somewhere. That word has come to define the case. Zebb is somewhere. Somewhere in the woods, in a grave, in the foundation of a building, in an incinerator, scattered in ash, devoured by animals, concealed under layers of concrete poured years ago. The theories never end. One investigator believes Zebb may have been burned in an industrial furnace, an old kiln, or even the very same wood stove Owens used to destroy the Cod family's remains. It would explain the total lack of evidence, the total erasure. Another officer theorized that Owens may have buried Zebb on private land now developed, hidden beneath the floor of a new home or commercial site. Others still believe Owens had help, that someone else was involved, perhaps Misty Taylor's boyfriend, perhaps someone from Owens' circle who has never spoken up. In a particularly chilling theory, it suggested that Zebb may have died accidentally during a confrontation or intimidation attempt gone wrong, a fight that turned deadly, a panic, and then a cover-up. It's the theory that makes the most sense, the one that police lean toward unofficially. But in the absence of a confession or forensic proof, it remains just that, a theory. In 2022, the North Carolina Center for Missing Persons quietly added Zebb's name to their active investigations page again, bringing renewed attention to the case. A new detective was assigned, not the first new lead, but another fresh set of eyes, another chance for a breakthrough. Behind closed doors, cold case units are still actively reviewing old evidence, cross-referencing Owens' history, rechecking cell tower pings from that night, reprocessing audio from tip-line calls, and attempting once more to locate the source of the hotel keycard found in Zebb's Mazda. But what they lack, more than anything, is testimony. And Owens isn't talking. In a rare interview given to a prison therapist, parts of which were later leaked, Owens allegedly stated that he was not the man people think he is, and that he was holding on to things because there's nothing left to lose. Whether that referred to Zebb or to some deeper pathology, no one knows. But it was enough to reignite hope in Denise. She believes that Owens will someday crack. Not out of guilt, but out of ego. He won't die with the truth. He'll want someone to know what he did, to acknowledge his control, his power. The question is when, and if it will be too late. The cold procedural language used by law enforcement. Missing person. Suspicious circumstances. Open investigation. Fails to convey the horror of the story. This isn't a file. It's a family's life. It's a son, born in 1981, who dreamed of becoming a computer technician, who loved animals, who worked hard and paid his own way, who was never given the chance to live past 18. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. He didn't have enemies. He just trusted the wrong person and disappeared. That fact alone sends chills down the spines of every mother, every father, every sibling watching this case. Because it means it could happen to anyone. One wrong phone call, one impulsive decision, one moment of misplaced trust, and you're gone, your face on a flyer, your name on a forum, your life reduced to theories. And what lingers most in Zebb's story is the intentional cruelty that seems baked into the clues. The parked car, the smudged lip print, the fake sick call, the jacket and hotel key, the starving puppy. None of it screams random. It was calculated, staged, meant to send a message, or worse, to disorient and mock. It was a puzzle never meant to be solved. And yet, for all the dead ends and false leads, for all the silence, there remains one immovable truth. Someone knows what happened to Zebb Quinn. And that someone is still alive. That someone could speak tomorrow and change everything. Until then, the Quinn family waits. They wait through holidays, through anniversaries, through every January that creeps back in like a cold wind, reminding them of what they lost. And as the investigation inches forward behind closed doors, one question echoes across Asheville. What is the weight of a secret? And how long can it be carried before it breaks? Zebb Quinn was last seen on the night of January 2nd, 2000. He was 18 years old. He was driving a light green 1990 Mazda Protege, later found abandoned. His disappearance remains one of the most chilling and mysterious unsolved cases in North Carolina history. If you have any information, no matter how small, contact the Asheville Police Department or the North Carolina Center for Missing Persons. Because even after 2 decades, one truth can change everything. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share